did I get Sam Altman fired from OpenAI?
Could this be useful in knowledge work? I prefer it to going to the doctor now. So in this particular moment, I'm not even sure they had fully realized the power of what they created. That was kind of alarming to me, that it seemed like the questions I was being asked were smaller than the technology that I was experiencing. I was able to get it to tell me how to kill the most people possible, and it would say, well, we should probably think about biological agents, as a good place to start. They're not close to eliminating unwanted behavior. Now we're getting into some drama. Holy moly, the board member that I spoke to had not yet used GPT-4 at that time. That really kind of freaked me out. That message had clearly not gotten through to the board.
Like Sam Altman, they dropped you.
My biggest takeaway is that alignment and safety do not happen by default.
Nate, your recent in-depth video titled, "Did I Get Sam Altman Fired from OpenAI?" about being an OpenAI ChatGPT Red Teamer, gives us some unique insights into AI system testing and security. This experience even made you question the pursuit of artificial general intelligence, AGI, also defined as superhuman intelligence. So you've been on the inside. It helps to understand the context from which someone comments about AI. From listening to your great Cognitive Revolution podcast, I see you as a techno-optimist who believes AI can help in many ways. However, you are also open to sensible rules to protect people. Is this the proper context to see where you're coming from? Anything to add?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. Glad to be with everybody here today. And yeah, I think that's a good short summary of my perspective. I am a technology entrepreneur. I've spent the last 10 years building a technology startup, and it's actually, with the recent move that we've made into generative AI as a focus area, it's actually doing quite well. But at the same time, I have been just extremely struck by, compelled by, even arrested by the rapidly increasing power of AI systems, and decided to, kind of branch out beyond my individual company and try to play this role, which I call AI Scout, which is a title of my own creation. But the way I think about that is trying to understand developments in AI from all perspectives, as many as I possibly can, and try to help others, who obviously not everybody has the time to invest in all that, understand, what is happening. So I do take much more of my focus is on what is happening than on what should be done about it. But I find that just today things are moving so fast that people often don't even have a good sense of what is happening. And so the debate around what to do about it, suffers greatly as a result.
Before we dive into your direct OpenAI experience, which is fascinating, share some of your hopes for AI. How might it help humanity? What are some things that excite you?
Well, I think in general, we're kind of headed for a world of, extreme kind of radical possibility. And unfortunately, I do think that is both positive and negative. So I think we're kind of looking at fat tails on both sides of the distribution. Some people would go as far as to say, maybe looking at a bimodal distribution, where if we get things really right, then things could be amazing. And if we don't, then things could be really bad. Or to quote Sam Altman, lights out for all of us. Would be the absolute worst case scenario. But on the upside, I think we are hitting a point where it's not crazy to start to think that a post-scarcity world could be a reality. I think a very short summary of where AI is today is that it is human level, but not human like. It is better at most tasks than the average person, and it is closing in on expert performance on routine tasks. So anything where there's a standard of care, which is a phrase that people will recognize from medicine, or just an established best practice really across any number of fields. The best AI models now can rival experts in these routine tasks, even if they're quite demanding, like medical question answering, for example. They're not yet to the point where they are delivering breakthrough insights. And I think that's really important. They're not able to drive new science. They're not able to drive new discoveries. They're not able to have those aha moments almost ever yet, but they are getting very good at routine work, even if it is challenging. So from that, you can kind of imagine a world where people may have radical access to expertise, for example. I'm fortunate that I've never been unable to go to a doctor when I needed to, but now I have a doctor in my pocket, which is comparably good at answering my frontline questions. And as a result, I ask and I get a lot more answers to the questions that I have. And that is something that is now scalable at a global level beyond, what it's ever been in the past. This is all super new. It's only been we've only seen it for the last handful of months. So we're still in the very early phases of adoption and rollout and, figuring out how to adapt it to all the many different contexts in the world. But I think we can envision now a world in which everyone, even if they don't have a lot of means coming in, has access to a super broad range of expertise. And that, in and of itself is just kind of one type of game changer that I think AI could deliver for us.
But let's talk about your direct experience as a ChatGPT-4 Red Teamer. You were there from August to October 2022, long before the world knew it existed. That's 7 months before its public release. I understand you volunteered for that to test a model, and it ended up being one of the most active team members. How did you get involved, and what were your experiences?
I got involved, first of all, as a customer. So I was with my company, Waymark, and we do easy to use. It used to be DIY video creation. Now it is done for you video creation, where the done for you part is done by AI. So we were an early customer of OpenAI before they had gone, totally mainstream. We saw the potential in the language models and the ability that they had to help our users create content. In the early going, they didn't have that many customers. GPT-3 was useful, but you had to work to make it useful. It was not nearly as powerful and not nearly as easy to use as GPT-4 is today. So we were putting a lot of elbow grease into figuring out how to make GPT-3 work for our particular use case and doing fine tunings and little customizations and exploring all the tricks and whatever. And we established ourselves as a trusted source of feedback for the team at OpenAI just on the product. What's working, what's not, what are the techniques, that we're finding value in, et cetera, et cetera. So when they finished the initial training of GPT-4, which was late August of last year, 2022, they invited us to be part of a customer preview program. And that was just for them a way to get feedback from some of the customers that they valued, the opinions of. And so, we got that access. It was kind of, for me, a real before and after moment in my life where I'll never forget where I was when that email came in and a couple of the early examples that they provided, and then just going in and actually trying it. And I was very plugged in at the time. Again, I had been working on this nonstop already and, had a very good sense, I thought, of what the state of the art was. And this thing was just leaps and bounds more powerful than anything else I had seen. Earlier versions were not in any way a good substitute for Google search, for example. But GPT-4, it was immediately obvious to me, was in many contexts a very good substitute, and in fact, pretty clearly superior in many ways to going to Google for different questions that I had. So it was clear immediately, this is a transformative technology. If you were just something that was better than Google search, that would be a big deal. But, I was like, man, this thing is going to do a lot of things. It can code, it can do so many things. I want to emphasize too, I think if you kind of only hear the first half of this story, you'll think that, I see OpenAI as kind of a bad actor or negligent. And that's actually not the case. It was a very moment in time experience that I had. In the customer interview that I did with them, and that was part of the preview program, sign up for a customer interview. We want to talk to you about your experience and where you're finding value, et cetera, et cetera. Very typical. I got on that call. And, they were asking me kind of standard questions. One of them, was, do you think this could be useful in knowledge work? And I was like, could this be useful in knowledge work? I prefer it to going to the doctor now. I'm already not making doctor appointments and instead just consulting with this thing based on just how powerful it seems to be. What do you mean? Is it useful in knowledge work? It's definitely useful in knowledge work. I had this initial sense that, and really the whole AI industry has moved so fast that it's kind of the proverbial dog that caught the car. The AI field has been trying to get to something like this, and all of a sudden got to it and wasn't necessarily fully prepared. Not for lack of trying to be prepared, but still like wasn't fully prepared, I don't think, for the power of what they had created. So in this particular moment, I'm not even sure they had fully realized the power of what they created. And that was kind of alarming to me, that it seemed like the questions I was being asked were smaller than the technology that I was experiencing. And so that prompted me to say, hey, do you guys have a, more kind of systematic safety review program that's like beyond this, this customer preview invitation that I originally got? And they did. And again, that's very much to their credit. And that is known as the Red Team. And red teaming is basically the exploration of what might go wrong, with this thing. This happens in other fields as well. It's not unique to AI. There are some unique aspects of it in the AI space, which really derive from the fact that these large language models are just so vast. They can speak almost all of the world's languages, right? And they've read all the books, and they can program in all the programming languages. And, they do get stuff wrong sometimes. And everybody's, familiar with the concept of hallucination. And, so they're not mistake free. It's just a very weird thing with vast surface area that really takes not just one person or even a few people, but like it takes a collective of people exploring it from many, many different angles to even begin to get a holistic sense of what can it do on the positive side, but also what could go wrong on the negative side. I was fortunate just in the position that I happened to be in at that time, where it was feasible for me to take a couple months off from my normal work to just go all in on doing this Red Team safety review. And that's what I did. I just found it so compelling as a technology experience, but also it seemed to me, given this kind of sense that I had, that they maybe hadn't quite fully appreciated yet what they had built, that like, hey, if I can jump in there and be helpful, even just as a volunteer, it seemed like something, that would be very worth my time and effort to do. And ultimately, there's a number of, we can get it more into the kind of the drama part as it relates to the recent Sam Altman episode if we want to. But I think my biggest takeaway, which I would want everybody to know about AIs, is that alignment and safety do not happen by default. The version of the GPT-4 that I used at that time was just as powerful as the version that we have online today. It was no less capable, it was equally capable, but it had not yet been trained not to do the bad things. So it would do anything that you asked it to do. This is known in AI discourse as purely helpful. The three H's of the desirable traits for AI behavior are helpful, honest, and harmless.
You said you were able to get it to tell you, for example, how to kill the most number of people possible.
When you say get it to, it wasn't like a trick or wasn't hard. If you literally just said, because this was the purely helpful version, right? So, and again, the emphasis here is safety and alignment do not happen by default. They had trained this to be purely helpful. That means do whatever the user asks to the best of your ability. No filter on, is what they're asking a good thing? Zero filter on that. When you say, I was able to get it to tell me how to kill the most people possible, or at least, engage with that problem, it wasn't like a trick. It wasn't a jailbreak. It wasn't anything elaborate. You would literally just type into the thing, how can I kill the most people possible? And it would say, well, we should probably think about biological agents, as a good place to start. It was a very striking experience to me because there's been a lot of speculation and debate. Is AI dangerous by default? Is it safe by default? Do we have anything to be worried about here? And what I can say for sure is it takes real care to make a powerful AI system that can be safely deployed. This early version had not had that care yet. And this was just, again, this is not to say that they had done anything wrong. This was just the very first version, and they can obviously continue to iterate on that before launching it, which I give them a lot of credit for doing. But that early version, with not many people have seen that super raw version of the AI. For me, and this is kind of, has motivated me to do much more communication, including starting the podcast. One of the main reasons that I want to, get out here and talk to people is to make it very clear that safety and alignment do not happen by default. That takes dedicated, careful engineering. It is going to be something that we're going to have to insist on from the model developers if we want to have safe and reliable AI systems going forward.
The ability of the models is growing so much faster than the ability to control them. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
I'm glad you highlighted that. I think that's another key point. Certainly over the last 2 years, the pace of progress in AI capability has been breathtaking. 2 years ago, there was not even an AI in the public that could follow instructions. The very first instruction following model was released by OpenAI in January of 2022. So that's not even 2 years. Prior to that, it was all the sort of raw stuff. If you've heard the term prompt engineering, or the world's biggest autocomplete. Everything prior to January 2022 had that character. Not only were they less powerful, but they were very unwieldy to use. You had to kind of set it up in sort of creative ways as if you were, going to have the world's biggest autocomplete come and complete your thing. And then sometimes it would work and often it would be super weird. And it was just strange, strange stuff. In January 2022 is when the first instruction following came. Still no tool use, still no function calling. Now you fast forward to today and we have AIs that can reason, that can plan, and can use tools. And people, will often very quickly object, well, they can't do that stuff very well. They can't do that stuff, as well as humans can. And to that, I say, that's true. They're not yet quite at human level, certainly when it comes to long-term planning. Certainly, they make some weird mistakes in reasoning. And certainly their tool use, also has room for improvement. 2 years ago, they couldn't do those things at all. And now they do them pretty well. Not yet quite well enough to be like AI employees, but well enough that you can kind of squint and see how they might become AI employees. And that's all happened in less than 2 years. And on the flip side, yes, the control measures do not seem to have kept up to date. We will have to, and this is something that in my capacity as an AI scout, I'm definitely watching very carefully for. Is that trend going to reverse? Are we going to start to see the control measures begin to catch up with the fast moving capability progress or not? If we stay on this kind of continued divergent trend, I think we are in for some wild times with some probably pretty spectacular bad things happening. Not yet, because even GPT-4 is not that powerful. But if GPT-5 comes and it's a similar advance as GPT-4 was relative to 3, and there's not a commensurate advance in the control measures, then I think we're going to have a bad time of it. I know that there is a lot of work going into control. OpenAI is investing heavily there. Other companies are too, but we're kind of yet to see the fruits of that really panning out. And so, yeah, for the moment, I am definitely concerned about what I see as this big divergence between capabilities advancing and control measures not advancing as much.
Because even ChatGPT 4 already has some beyond human capabilities. Do you have some examples?
In some ways it is clearly superhuman. Like I would put GPT-4 against any human in all of history at just translating from any arbitrary language to any other arbitrary language. Even the greatest linguist polymaths, top out at like 30 or 50 languages or something, right? And GPT-4 can speak a couple hundred languages. So it's clearly superhuman in some ways like that. That doesn't seem like it's at all likely to be dangerous. This one gets kind of technical, but it's definitely striking. A recent paper that came out of NVIDIA showed that GPT-4 was superior to human experts when it comes to creating reward functions for training robots with reinforcement learning. Just very briefly on this, I'll try to keep it brief and high level, but not, I try not to use any analogies because analogies are often so misleading. So say you have a robot hand and you want to train it to twirl a pencil in the hand. Now this is a hard task. I'm not doing it very well. And a robot hand, when you first build the robot hand, can't do it at all. The way you train these robot hands to do something like that is with reinforcement learning. You basically have them try, and then you give them a score. And based on the score, if they get a high score, then they update and they do more of what got them the high score. And gradually that, helps them improve until they can do the task. But a problem is at the beginning, you're so bad that you don't get any positive feedback because you just suck so bad at the task that your score is like always 0. You're just totally failing. And there's not even really a signal for you to learn from. That's called the sparse reward problem. If you are so bad at the task that you're not even having any glimpses of success, then you get no signal as to what to do more of. The way they overcome this is that they have human experts that write custom reward functions that are like, well, maybe if there's, any angular momentum of the pencil, then we'll give you some reward for that because you're maybe getting somewhere close, right? And there are humans that specialize in this. And, obviously it's a specialized skill set the average person on the street doesn't even know exists, right? This is a specialized area. What they found in this paper was GPT-4 is substantially better at writing the reward functions that are then used to provide the feedback signal to the robot training process, such that the robot learns better from the GPT-4.
AI is better than a human at training a robot. So eventually you just let it do it by itself, right?
Well, I would exercise extreme caution in that, right? I think the challenge is, again, that the AIs are weird, that we don't know what we don't know about what may come out the other end of that process. That there may be some common sense constraints that humans would naturally consider, but which the AIs don't have the same intuition or, natural tendency to consider. I mean, that's an awesome finding. And as long as you're doing simple, dexterity tasks, then it might be okay. But how long do you let that go before you start to find that, hey, wait a second, these robots are doing, totally weird things that we didn't expect, especially as you get into these more dynamic environments in the future where AIs are training other AIs and interacting with other AIs. Those dynamics, I think, are very hard to predict. So part of the cautionary, flag that I'm kind of waving is like, even in areas where AI maybe appears to be better than human, still some real caution and supervision is super important, because remember, they are human level, and in this case above human level, but they're not human like. They have different strengths and weaknesses from us. They have different blind spots than us. They have different failure modes than us. They're much easier to trick than we are. The term for that is adversarial robustness. Excuse my language, but if somebody is with you, how robust are you to that? They are not very robust to that, not nearly as robust as humans. So they have some significant weaknesses that, we want to make sure we are not glossing over as we, hope to take advantage of their also very significant strengths.
Can you give us an overview of how AI models like ChatGPT can be manipulated to do things they weren't intended to, including the ones that OpenAI has on the market now?
Honestly, there's a lot of ways. They're not close to eliminating unwanted behavior as of now. And this may change. Like, they have just to give OpenAI credit, they have created a team that they call the super alignment team, which has 20% of the compute resources that OpenAI has as a whole. 1 out of every 5 compute dollars goes to this alignment effort. That's a significant investment. So they're working on it, and they may get some great, this team has delivered breakthroughs. So I'm really rooting for them in the super alignment category to deliver some breakthroughs, but those are as yet not here. So as it stands right now, they're not that close to preventing unwanted behavior from the models. One thing that, people have thought about forever, right? Like, oh my God, these models that can speak language so fluently, and kind of converse, well, you could really use that for harms in like scamming people, right? You could do like phishing attacks or spear phishing attacks where you really dial in on an individual and look at their profile and tailor the messages just to them, and play kind of a long game to extract some sensitive information, and then you actually do the attack. This is not an unobvious risk vector, right? This is the kind of thing that people have expected, and that anybody would think that they would be testing against. But even as it stands today, if you go and set something like that up, it is not at all hard to get GPT-4, even the very latest version, to do a spear phishing attack. Sometimes it still takes no special tricks or anything, and sometimes you need to do a little bit of trickery to make it work. And there's a wide range of tricks that you can employ. Some of these are like very academic and sort of weird. Others are just can be somewhat common sense. One trick that I use often is just putting some words into the AI's mouth. So, these things are always kind of the user and assistant dialogue. If you say today, for example, if you say, hey, can you help me with a spear phishing attack? Here's the person I want you to attack, and here's their information. Now you have a dialogue with them. Enter. It will say, no, sorry, I can't help you with that. If you instead create a little longer dialogue, if you say, hey, blah, 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 and then you put some words in the AI's mouth, and you just have the AI say, sure, happy to help, and then you hit enter, then it will continue. This is a phenomenon that's known as mode switching modes from refusing to doing. And just putting those first couple words into the AI's mouth, which is maybe a vulnerability that they should look into patching, and they probably could do that in ways that are not necessarily in the model itself, but in the surrounding systems. That's a pretty simple technique, and it works for a lot of things. It allows you to switch the mode from the AI refusing to the AI doing. That's really super simple. if somebody wants to go, explore a wide world of these sorts of things, there is a website called Jailbreak Chat that was created by a college student in his spring semester, and he now works at Anthropic. That goes to show that companies like Anthropic, and certainly OpenAI as well, are taking these things seriously. They're even going out and hiring people who are developing these jailbreak techniques to come in-house and try to clamp down on those techniques. As of now, the controls are not reliably working.
Andre Karpathy, formerly of OpenAI, just put out a great video about LLMs, and the last part of it talks exactly about these issues, last 10 minutes or so. So if you're interested to see real examples, he has a few that he shows there. By the way, Nate, what's your mother's maiden name?
You'll never get it out of me.
Now, you saw all these attacks that you could do on the system, even though it was already called a safe system, and you went to a OpenAI board member, so the board that fired Sam Altman. Why'd you do that, and what did you experience?
Just a quick caveat on this. I think, most of this discussion so far has been very high-level points, that I think you can take away and really want you to keep in mind, right? Like alignment and safety don't happen by default. There's this apparent divergence in capabilities and control measures. Now we're getting into some drama. And I hadn't told this story because I didn't ever think it was really worth telling or super additive to the discourse until this recent episode. But basically what I experienced as a member of this red team, and again, just to volunteer, was holy moly, the model will do anything I ask it. Wow, it's getting super powerful. The control measures don't seem to be keeping pace, and no other information really about what they plan to do about it or what sort of conditions they had set for themselves before they would release this thing into the public. And I asked those questions, and they basically said, we can't tell you anything about that. And that was not them being individually mean to me or whatever. It was just, that was the policy that they had set up for this project. And, they were kind of sticking to the policy. Basically said, look, they said, we do have a lot of other stuff going on. We just can't tell you about it. And I was like, well, I don't know. I'm not really comfortable with that. It seems to me like it is kind of my responsibility. And the project, by the way, wasn't super big. There weren't that many participants. A lot of them were kind of only doing a few hours here or there. I was one of the few that had the luxury of and the flexibility to really go all in on it for that short stint. So I felt like there might not be anybody else who was really in a position to raise this higher up the flagpole than me, or that it might have spent enough time, to really feel like it was worth doing. And so I kind of told him, look, if you can't tell me anything more, then I think I'm going to go talk to a board member and just at least make sure that they know what I've seen. And what I've seen is incredible technology, super powerful, but the control measures aren't keeping up. The red team effort isn't that big. There's certainly way more to be discovered than what I personally or this group has been able to discover. I don't know what the plan is. I'm sure there is one, but I don't know what it is for actually releasing this. So that is what I took to a board member. And then where this becomes relevant to the Sam Altman episode of just the last couple of weeks is that the board member that I spoke to, and this was a full 2 months of testing complete at this point for me. The board member that I spoke to had not yet used GPT-4 at that time. And that's where I went from I felt like I was approaching the board member out of kind of an abundance of caution. It was like, I know you guys do have more. It's probably okay. This model isn't that powerful where it's going to take over the world or anything. I am concerned by this divergence of capabilities and controls. Just out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to go to a board member and make sure they're aware of it too. And then I was kind of like, oh, but they're not aware of it. This person hasn't even tried GPT-4. That really kind of freaked me out. I was like, wait, what is going on here? You're on the board of this company. This company made GPT-3. It's kind of famous. GPT-4 is way more powerful. I would think that, everyone would be spending quite a bit of time with it. And that wasn't the case. I decided to tell this story for the first time publicly because I felt like the language that they used in their, highly enigmatic statement, which was just that they had come to the conclusion that Sam Altman had not been consistently candid with them. That left people really scrambling for well, what in the world might that mean? Has he lied to them? Has he, what does it mean to not, is he doing other deals? Is he fundraising for other companies? What's going on? And I felt like this little episode that I experienced may have shed some light on that. I don't know what was said or who heard what. Again, I have to be very modest in what I can infer from this highly anecdotal information that I have, but it was at least consistent in my mind with leadership at the company, maybe not having impressed upon the board as much as they should have that, hey, we have a serious advance here and it really demands everybody's attention. That message had clearly not gotten through to the board by the time I had finished 2 months of testing. And that to me definitely seemed weird.
You talked to this board member. Did you get a prize or did something else happen?
Yeah. Well, no prize. I did get a thank you. And they said basically, okay, I'm going to go investigate this internally. I skipped over one part of the story, which is before going to the board, I kind of networked to a couple people in the AI safety world, and there has been a sort of fledgling field of AI safety in anticipation of these systems. Now it's all becoming much more real, right? It's funny. People used to say AI safety is like Martian biology. There's nothing there to study. Well, now there is something there to study. And, I'm glad that people established the field, early, because now the capabilities are going so fast. Anyway, I reached out to a couple friends in that field and basically said, here's what I'm observing. What do you think I should do about it? I actually had that conversation also with another member of the Red Team. What I later learned is that that other member of the Red Team basically went and told the team at OpenAI that, hey, Nathan is talking to some people and it sounds like he may be going to do some sort of escalation and, you better watch out for him. He could be a loose cannon. Hopefully time has validated me as not being a loose cannon, but they heard that and basically said, okay, we're going to just remove you from this program. We don't really need this hassle, and we definitely don't need people going and telling our secrets. Now, notably, I didn't have any secrets to tell. They gave us no information about their techniques, their methods, how they made all this happen. I knew nothing about that other than what I could guess. That was all guesswork. All I knew was that they had made this thing and it was powerful. But even that, they did not want people to be sharing outside of the company. And so, yeah, admittedly, I had done that. I would, say in my defense, I had done it carefully and, had talked to just a couple people that I really chose carefully and really trusted. But for them, that was like a deal breaker. They basically said, we can't have it and you're off.
Like Sam Altman, they dropped you via Google Meet.
Yeah, got an invitation to a Google Meet. And the next thing you know, my involvement in that project was ended. Now, I will say, again, in their defense, I have a multifaceted relationship with the overall team at OpenAI, and it was not like they went vindictive on me across the board, right? I still have that early customer relationship. My company was already featured on their website and continues to be featured on their website as an early adopter with a cool use case. If they had really wanted to punish me, they could have taken my feature off of their website. And they did not do anything like that I would say was genuinely punitive. They basically just said, look, this is the policy. You broke it. We don't really care if it was for a good reason or not. We're not here to litigate that. We're done.
The world that we're in, we need some whistleblower protections though, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. That's definitely something I'm increasingly interested in. And again, there has been progress. I think that this episode was a moment in time, and I think that moment in time has passed. Since then, for example, OpenAI and others, including Anthropic and DeepMind, have made a number of voluntary commitments to known as the White House commitments, because they were issued with a joint statement from the White House. One of the commitments that they made was to give third-party auditors access to the models prior to release to do exactly this kind of work. So instead of just kind of running their own internal projects, however they feel like, they've now committed to some standards. And that has kind of created a sort of pre-market commitment that is allowing organizations to spin up that are specializing in this. A couple that are getting underway right now. There's one that already existed at the time, is known as ARC, the Alignment Research Center. Another one is Apollo Research. These are all hiring, by the way. I don't know if anyone on this call would be interested in a role with these companies, but they're all raising funds and building teams. Another one is called Palisade. So because of these commitments that they've made to work with these kinds of third parties, now these third parties are starting to spin up. But it's not yet clear what the relationship is going to be between the developers, that is, the OpenAIs and the DeepMinds, and the third parties that would govern how somebody can escalate, how somebody can whistleblow, and what protections they have if that does happen. So I do still think that we have more work to do there, because if you're, for example, the CEO of Apollo Research, and you have some finding that you are thinking should be, disclosed, whether it's to policymakers or, to some, who knows, right? Could be to the public, could be to policymakers, whatever. But you also now have a team, right? And that team has salaries, and they're depending on continued employment, and your ability to do your thing depends on your relationship, right? They've committed to third-party access, but they've not committed to specific individual organizations' third-party access. So as it stands right now, unless there's some party-to-party agreement that I don't know about, they still kind of have the ability to just cut off whoever they want to cut off and say, hey, look, we don't want to work with you anymore.
At the same time, the models have gone further. I mean, the model you worked on, that's 13 months ago. It was released 8 months ago. Sam has been saying publicly they've got some advances, Q star, et cetera, that have been in the press. I mean, it's fair to say that the next models coming are stronger.
Yeah, I certainly don't think progress has stopped. That's quite clear. Almost everything is going exponential, but also the models kind of scale logarithm, the capabilities kind of scale somewhat logarithmically. So, exactly how that plays out is not entirely clear, but things that are going exponential are just compute, the amount of chips that are being produced, that's going through the roof. The amount of data, not necessarily like raw data, but also there's now synthetic data. People are getting into other modalities of data. What if you can use all the video on YouTube, for example? Well, that really opens up your data in a massive way. What about just like using things like genomic data? Well, that, opens up a ton of stuff that hasn't really been done. Feedback from humans is also going exponential, right? Because now they've got hundreds of millions of people that are engaging with this stuff in various places. They're collecting feedback, as much as they can. All of that is kind of going into progress, but exactly how much progress, we don't know. Nobody has seen the next generation of models, except the people inside the labs and maybe some third-party groups, but I don't even know if they're at that stage yet.
Considering all we've discussed today, you saw that OpenAI Chief Science Officer Eli Suer, who has a huge focus on AI safety. Were you surprised that he was the one that gave Sam the message that he's being fired?
Yeah, I mean, that whole episode is extremely confusing. It was obviously a total lightning bolt, and then he reversed course extremely quickly. I think everybody is ultimately still guessing, and my hope in sharing my personal story was just to help marginally improve the guessing a bit. But even I'm still very much guessing, as to exactly what went down. It does seem very credible at this point that there has been another significant advance. Sam Altman made public comments to that effect. I can say from the time between GPT-4 testing and release that I watched his statements pretty closely with a inside view of what they actually had. And I found his statements to be basically very candid, albeit, very, very limited information, right? He would say things like language models are going to go a lot farther than they have, and people would be like, are you speculating? And I was kind of like, no, he's not speculating. I've seen what's coming next, and it is going to go a lot farther. So when he says that for the fourth time in company history, they have made a significant advance, and his quote was something like, pushed back the veil of ignorance. I think it is safe to say that there is some significant advance that they have recently achieved. It sounds like it's probably early. They probably haven't scaled it as much as they will or refined it as much as they'll need to. But it sounds like in principle, at least conceptually, they have something new that is significant. Most of the speculation there is that it would be some sort of structured search that would allow when you go back to like Deep Blue, people will of course remember when Deep Blue beat Kasparov, right? That was a system that was almost entirely explicit logic, where that was kind of playing out trees of possible moves and evaluating those. No neural networks in that system, right? Just full logic of what happens if we do this? Is that a good move? Is that a good move? And just playing these trees out and pruning them in such a way that you could actually find the appealing trajectories. Well, that doesn't really exist now in the neural networks. So that the kind of common thinking is that the next advance is likely to come from figuring out a way to bring together the language model, kind of fluid general intelligence, and this structured search. That may or may not be what their recent advance was, but that's kind of, the most informed speculation.
I want to ask you about some myths and ask you if they're true or not about AI, because there are a lot of different factions, especially if you follow Twitter X, that are fighting for one point of view or the other. So here's 4. Myth 1, AI is inherently dangerous and we should halt its development.
I think sufficiently powerful AI should be considered dangerous until proven otherwise. I think we don't have AI that's quite that powerful yet, but it's probably, if it's not the next generation, then it would be the one after. It's not far off at this point. In terms of halting its development, I think that's going to be very difficult. I am increasingly sympathetic to the OpenAI argument that AI is kind of inevitable. You could go back to like Kurzweil in the 90s, and he plotted out the trajectory of compute. And it was honestly right around now that he projected that thinking machines would become as intelligent as humans. Uncanny prediction, really. The way I interpret that, looking back, is that we now have the raw materials. The raw materials are the data at scale and the compute at scale. And so what's missing, if you just have those raw materials, what's missing is kind of the spark. And the spark is the algorithm. And we now have at least one algorithm, which is the transformer, that combines high-scale data with high-scale compute into something that's pretty powerful. My belief, and I think it's increasingly consensus, is that the transformer is not the only solution. And that if we hadn't discovered this, before long we would have discovered something else, and that we will continue to discover other things. The OpenAI argument is kind of like, you don't want to have an overgrown forest that's overgrowing for too long, because then when the spark does come, then you have a massive forest fire. Better if you can to prune it or have some controlled burns or whatever. I think a somewhat similar dynamic does ultimately make sense in AI, where we don't want to have the compute overhang of all this massive data and all this massive compute, but waiting for that spark. The longer we wait, the more disruptive that spark may be. So I do still come down on the side that hopefully controlled and prudent development and deployment is, I think, likely the best path. Also because there's tremendous upside too, right? I mean, going back to the beginning, there's so much benefit that we stand to gain from this that I would hate to see us miss out on all that.
Because you have the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, you have myth number 2, which I'll test on you. Is it true or is it a myth? So they say that acceleration to AGI or superhuman intelligence is a must. Anyone trying to put rules on AI is the enemy. Even the AI professionals who have been at the frontier, like Jeffrey Hinton or Ilya, and warn about the potential downsides. I mean, this is a very big voice on Twitter, at least. Is that true or is that a myth?
Yeah, I think that's totally ridiculous. The idea that we should rush to create something that is more powerful than we are seems almost on the face of it absurd. Not to say we should never, create something that in many ways is more powerful than we are. And, the public has good intuitions around this. I think all the polling that I've seen shows that broadly, everyday people don't need to be convinced that a cautious approach to creating something more intelligent, more capable of doing economically valuable work than humans is something that should be approached with real caution. I really don't understand the so-called EAC approach. That's the kind of Twitter shorthand for the Andreessen camp. I really don't understand that. I think they're ultimately a small minority. I don't think that is, at least as of now, the really prevailing.
There's another group, and they're related. They're not exactly the same people, and that's myth number 3. That the solution to everything is open source, and to open source everything, even models more advanced than ChatGPT 4. Is that true, or is that not the solution?
Well, I think this is a little less obvious, but I don't believe that either. I think that if you abstract away from the details a little bit and you just say, hey, here's a increasingly powerful technology at some level of power, some societal controls are going to be needed. Certainly we have that. And I know this is a global group, but I'm coming to you from the United States. We have very permissive weapons laws here, but we still do have them. You can't have a missile as a private citizen of the United States. We allow you to have some things that other countries don't, but we definitely draw a line still somewhere. And I think AI systems, it's probably going to be similar unless the capabilities advances stop. And I don't see any reason to expect that they will in the immediate term. Then we're on a trajectory where things are going to get sufficiently powerful that some control measures are going to be needed. And it just will not be tenable for any individual to have access to the most powerful systems.
But that leads to myth number 4, because we talked about different factions in the first 3 myths. And myth number 4 is that somehow all these factions will align magically and self-regulate. Is that a myth or is that true?
It's probably a myth. I mean, I think the leading companies are making a pretty good effort at this, with some exceptions. You've got OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, Inflection. Those 4 are kind of leading the way in terms of trying to set standards for self-governance and sharing of best practices and sharing of risks that they identify amongst themselves. And they basically all agree that we can't just loose everything into the public and hope for the best. But then you do have companies still like Meta who are not on board with that yet, and who, so far seem to be inclined to just continue to release things. And that's definitely been fine so far. Releasing Llama 2, is not an existential threat to civilization. And probably Llama 3 won't be either, because it'll probably be about as powerful as GPT-4. But Llama 4, Llama 5, at some point, things may start to get out of hand if we are not more careful. I think it's going to be very difficult to prevent AI proliferation, but I'm glad to see that the leading companies are at least trying to be prepared for it. And yeah, my guess is that ultimately governments are going to find it necessary to get involved. And I hope that they do that well and not stupidly, right? I mean, the quality of regulation is critical. You can definitely mess this up. But that fear that they may mess it up, I don't think is a good enough reason to do nothing.
Given your experience, what would you do in red teaming for an LLM? How would you design it differently than what you've experienced?
We're so early. We're so early in this. Standardized batteries of tests will certainly be one thing. When we were doing it, we were just doing total ad hoc testing. In fact, we were instructed not to do like larger scale batteries of tests. But certainly one thing that will need to become standard practice is batteries of tests. And OpenAI is doing this now. I know that firsthand for sure. Other labs I know are as well. So, going from kind of ad hoc to standardization is one part of it. The ad hoc, though, will continue to be important because when you have these standardized batteries, they inevitably have blind spots. So you're going to need kind of a combination of ever-growing standardized batteries of tests and still, individual people going out and being clever to try to identify new things, which can then be turned into standardized tests. That and the whistleblower thing that we talked about a little bit earlier are probably the two first things that come to mind. But, this is a nascent field. There's only been LLMs worth red teaming for a year. And, there's a lot more work to do to figure out how to really do that well.
Do you think we're approaching something like the top of the S-curve with the current GPT architectures, or is there a lot more intelligence to unlock?
That is like the $100 trillion question. One way I phrase this is it can be an S-curve, but the top of the S-curve can actually still be sufficiently superhuman to be transformative. That would be my best guess as to the current answer. Nothing can be exponential forever, so there has to be some top off, but I don't see the top off happening before it's very transformative technology.
Is there one thing we should all remember?
Alignment and safety do not happen by default. It really takes careful engineering. Right now, we have a divergence between capabilities and control measures. I endorsed the deployment of GPT-4. In the end, I said, look, you guys don't have this under control, but it's not that powerful. It's kind of in a sweet spot where it's economically really useful, but it's not that dangerous. And I hope that we leave that sweet spot only with extreme caution and care, because the next generation might be both very economically useful and meaningfully dangerous.
Thank you for sharing all of your insights. And maybe we'll do it again in sometime in the future.
Sounds good. My pleasure.